Good morning. This is Dr. Dario Burzynski with Children Come First on WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. We bring you information about children, education, anything that revolves around children, family living, preventative health. This morning we have on our broadcast Diane Watkins. Diane is Human Resource Coordinator and Staff Development for System-Wide Richmond City Schools in Richmond, Virginia. Good morning, Diane.
Good morning.
Diane is an extraordinary lady. The reason we have her on today is because she is project coordinator, has been for Richmond schools in the 100 Languages of Children. And the 100 Languages of Children are the program that travels the country regarding the Reggio Emilia schools, their approach to early childhood education. And we're going to be talking with her this morning about the Reggio Emilia schools of Italy, because right now we're looking at daycare in the state of Pennsylvania and what we can do with daycare. And this is probably the most extraordinary example of daycare in the world. Diane, give us a little bit of information about you. You just received an award.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I was named by the YWCA as Woman of the Year for Education in the region of Richmond. And it's quite an auspicious honor, and I was privileged to receive that award this past spring.
Diane is very, very active on many different fronts. She's on the board of the Richmond Children's Museum. She is on All Kids County Immunization Committee. She's been trained by the National Academy of Early Childhood Educators, and she's been on the Superintendent's Conference, and she created the Early Childhood Institute, and she's got memberships in more organizations than I've ever seen on anybody's resume. It's a privilege to have you here this morning. Diane, now let's start talking and tell people how the Reggio Emilia schools of Italy started. First of all, let's give it a little bit of a historical perspective.
I'd like to begin by saying that in 1991, I happened upon the Newsweek article, The 10 Best Schools in the World. And, of course, among them were the schools of Reggio Emilia, and that whet my appetite because my area is early childhood education. And certainly, immediately, I wanted to go. But as far as when they began, a gentleman named Loris Malaguzzi in 1946, after the war in Italy, in Reggio, happened upon some women. And
his name was Loris?
Loris
Malaguzzi.
Malaguzzi.
Uh-huh.
And he was an educator, but he happened upon these women who were digging in the rubble. He asked what they're doing, and they said, "We're building a school." So he stayed to help them, and he never left. And because of his training and deep insights into the area and his readings in early childhood education, he was able to develop for that community this outstanding approach to a way of working with young children. And of course, in the 1970s, the schools were touted throughout Italy, and revenues were pumped into them, and they now have, of course, citywide schools, municipally run schools for children, the infant toddlers from 3 months to 3 years, and then the preschools from 3 years to 6 years.
Now, the mothers who were a part of the Reggio schools originally, weren't they pregnant mothers from World War II?
Yes.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that they were impregnated by infiltrating soldiers and were asked to leave their communities because they were single mothers, unmarried. Is that correct?
Well, now I had not, that may be from Dario, from your reading, but I was not aware of that. But at any rate, they were very interested in building a place for their young children. And so they certainly embraced the theories and ideas of Loris Malaguzzi, who remained stalwart in his work in that community until he died about the mid-1990s.
Now, in the Reggio schools, these are all preschool children. About 95% of preschool children. Is that correct?
That's right.
What are the rest of the statistics on it?
Certainly. Well, the city runs about 20 schools for children 6, and about 13 infant toddler centers for children 4 months to 3 years old. In Italy, parents cannot go back to work until their baby is at least 3 months old, and that's a law. And I don't know whether that's throughout Italy, but certainly I found that out in Reggio. The children come from all socioeconomic and educational backgrounds, and 47% and 35% of the two age groups are served. So that's infant toddlers and preschool children. In Italy, about 90% of all children 3 to 6 years old attend some kind of school, whether it's a municipal or a national school or private school. And in Reggio Emilia, 95% of the preschool children are enrolled in school.
Wow, that is very, very high. 90% of the children, 3 to 6-year-olds, attend school in Italy. Is that a law?
Well, yes. And, of course, nationwide, it's the law that children must attend, that there is a preschool program for children at 4 years old.
All right. Now, let's go on to the Reggio schools. What is Loris's fundamental principles?
Well, Loris Malaguzzi believes that believed, because he did pass away, he believed that the image of the child was all important. And that seems to be the focus, that the image of the child, that the child is born with potential. The child is competent. The child wants to know. The child is full of resources and is powerful and is a researcher himself in understanding and knowledge. And that it takes the child, the teacher, and the parent working together to help facilitate learning. And so I think that's really the crux of his philosophy.
Now, we would all agree on that premise. However, the action part of that is often lacking in terms of, especially in America today, the parent and the teacher and the child do not work together. How do the Reggio schools accomplish this feat?
Well, and I think that what I need to add too is that the environment is also considered a teacher. So the home, the school, and the environment together, working to give the children enriched experiences. So in the Reggio schools, I think that you would see then in every 4-year-old or a preschool program, now these are for children 3 to 6 years old, you would see an art teacher called an artillerista who helps to work with the teachers to facilitate concept development through the creative arts. And this is what makes, I think, this program so unique, because generally speaking in our preschool programs, there is no art person, unless it's a public school preschool program in America where the art teacher may happen to do some work with the 4-year-old or 5-year-old children occasionally. But here you have in this community this art teacher who is attached to the school and whose job it is to help the teacher and the parent develop concepts with children.
Well, I was thinking in terms of your explanation of child, parent, and teacher working together. I understand that the Reggio schools, the relationships and the interaction of people is all considered an interrelated, that it's a community rather than the children going to school and learning subjects. It's not that way in the Reggio schools. It's an interrelated community, and interactions are what's important. Is that true?
That's true, and the schools have the parent advisory groups, I guess you would say. It would be similar to some of our programs here. Advisory groups of parents who help to provide the resources and support that the school needs to operate successfully, so that a group of parents may help to build a playground or a pond, or bring some materials into the school, as well as stay in the school to volunteer. as the person can, because many of these parents also work. So if their child care programs, parents are working, but still, even over that, the parents are able to provide some voluntary assistance in those programs. And the parent involvement is a very strong feature of this of the Reggio approach.
Now, the basic premise that he had regarding the image of the child is that basically a child is born whole just as they are and will learn no matter what. In our society, in our culture today, we tend to look at children exactly the opposite of that they are somehow born imperfect and unwhole, and that we have to fit them into a model that we consider appropriate for them. Am I assuming this correctly? Is this the basic premise in the Reggio schools?
Yes, I think you're right. And I think a good example is that, we see infants and we think they're cute, and we coo with them, and of course we give them examples of language, by the way, and we teach them how to relate to people by the way we treat them. But I think sometimes we forget that infant is a communicator. Even though the infant cannot articulate words, the infant can certainly, through his eyes and expressions, tell whether he's learned something, a new concept. I'm thinking really of a little girl in Reggio named Lucia. She was 10 months old, and her teacher in the Infant Toddler Center brought some catalogs over, and they began pouring through them, and she was showing the child watches. Well, the child was very interested in the watch, and then, of course, the teacher offered her own wristwatch and had the child to touch it, and then, of course, to hear it ticking. The child pointed to a watch, and the eyes saying, well, this is a watch. You knew the child wasn't saying that, but the eyes were saying it. And then the child put its ear or her ear down on the page to see if the watch in the catalog was ticking. So you see, the child was, even at a young age, building some concepts and some understandings. And so I think this is what the Reggio approach certainly shows, that we communicate from the day we're born, and we take cues, of course, from what the children tell us through their crying and so forth, but also that the child is all the while pulling in from the environment and building the basis for later development, concept development, and learning.
Now, the physical space of the Reggio schools is significant. How is that important?
Well,
you've been to Reggio in Italy.
Of course, a great deal of attention is spent in providing in those classrooms many kinds of things which will provoke children's thinking. And in fact, so you see collections of many kinds of things sorted out by color and shape. And so the environment is, and then in addition to the things that children touch, the plan itself, there are windows with light coming through, so children get impressions of how shadows look on walls. And there are hangings at the windows with maybe colored paper, and the light shines through that and makes a reflection of color on the wall. So the children are engaged in in the environment, seeing things from many different perspectives. Mirrors on tables, mirrors on shelves, convoluted shapes of mirrors that give a distorted picture. So the children are able to see themselves, see things, see how things look as from underneath. They're able to see themselves constantly, their own expressions. And so I think this is what certainly did grab my interest when I went over. Children had children painting on acrylic paper, and then hanging that paper against the light, so the light shone through, and gave an interesting perspective to the children's work.
You are listening to WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. This is Children Come First, and we are here every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m. We're listening this morning to Diane Watkins, who's Resource Director at Richmond Public Schools for the training of the Human Services Department and training and staff development, and one of our experts in the Reggio schools of Italy, the Reggio Emilia schools of Italy, which are daycares for very young children. And we're talking about how the Reggio schools are set up and how trying to compare and contrast them to American daycare. Now, what happens in a Reggio school is about interactions, interrelationships, and discovery. How do the schools use time and a child's personal rhythm? Because in our schools we are set by the clock. How do the Reggio schools operate by time?
Yes. Well, because children stay in those environments for 3 years. They're 3 years in the infant toddler centers, and then, of course, 3 years in the preschools, and they have the same teacher in each one of those groupings, so that the teacher gets to know the children very well and is able to pace the scheduling with around the children. Sometimes we in our preschool programs will have children certainly building with blocks or painting, but then at a certain time we cut it off and we put everything away. And this may not be true in the schools that we saw. The blocks may stay up for a few days or even longer. And sometimes themes take on a month of interest, and so the themes stay, and children are able to introduce new objects or items into the whatever the product may be.
Seems like there's a lot of continuity.
Yes, there is. I saw something very interesting. I was on the yard at one of the schools. I went to 6 schools when I was there, and this was a preschool, and there were about 3 boys who were outside playing, and the teacher had put a table outside with magic markers and paper. Well, the boys had built an obstacle course, and they had used boards and bricks, and they had configured an obstacle course. But then when they finished building it and trying it, they went to the table and drew it. And so you see there's an emphasis on representation. And of course they didn't learn that happenstance. It was early on, it was introduced, as a way of that symbolic representation was introduced in their lives early. And so that, of course, was a sophisticated, the drawings were sophisticated. The boys, who were 4 and 5 years old, had drawn themselves on this obstacle course that they had built, and with feet planted firmly on the boards. If your listeners know anything about young children, oftentimes at these young ages, they may draw themselves in the picture, but they themselves may not be planted solid on anything. They may just be there. Well, these boys had planted themselves on the obstacle course. They had counted the number of bricks that they used and made a transfer back to the paper. And so this was a very interesting, I thought, example of how the Reggio approach may be a little different. We spend so much time sometimes on the academic and ABC 1, 2, 3 that this higher level of thinking may not come into play as it could.
It sounds to me like the students are learning several things. First of all, their attention span becomes expanded because there's no time clock that says it's time to put away, it's time to go to this activity, it's time to go to that activity, but rather allows the child the opportunity to expand the attention span just by the very nature of the personal time clock we're operating out of a personal time clock rather than one hanging on the wall. And secondly, it seems to me that there's a great deal of depth that goes on in Reggio schools that is not in anywhere from our preschools all the way up. And the depth being that subject area is continued from one moment to the next and for long periods of time rather than in short staccato like we see perhaps on the television screen or on the computer screen or within our own classrooms, where after an hour the bell rings, we go on to the next and the next and the next. So
and I got the feeling that these little boys were not rushed in what they were doing, and I got the feeling too that they could come back to it. So you're absolutely right.
Extends many opportunities when you take the clock and put it outside the classroom and begin to listen to children. Now, the teachers in these schools, can you tell us a little bit about the teachers?
Well, yes. The teachers for in the preschool programs, for every 12 children, there is a teacher, so that those classes are 24 children. In our situation in America, generally speaking, you may have 16 children with a trained teacher, but then you may also have a teacher assistant. There, the two teachers are trained professionals. Now, I think that you need to know that in Reggio, when I say trained professionals, I'm not talking about a college degree person. In Reggio, those two co-teachers may have finished high school, but have spent intensive training in child care and in training in the Reggio approach. In addition to those two teachers, the school has, and there may be several sets of those children, but there is a pedagogista who would be a college-trained person or a college professor who works between about 6 schools and would be like a principal, and would work with among about 6 schools. So you have the pedagogista, and then you have the co-teachers, highly trained and highly knowledgeable about what they're doing with those children.
How are they trained differently than American educators?
Well, this is what I was really trying to express. While we go on to four-year colleges, and before we can go into become a full-fledged teacher and, of course, receive licensure, these individuals may be high school graduates who then go on and have training in what would be kind of like vocational education.
Yes.
Still, they're highly respected in the communities, but I cannot tell you what their pay is, but they're highly respected, and contrary, I think, sometimes to educators here.
Well, can you tell us if they're highly paid?
I just really don't, I'm not sure of that. I'm afraid to say that they would get comparably to what we get. I don't think so.
Okay.
Because, of course, the cost of living factors are probably very different. But they make a decent living and would make more than, let's say, a child care worker, perhaps. In America, the child care worker may get just minimum wage, and I think this is one of the issues that we're facing now here.
We're also facing those issues here in Pennsylvania, which is why I was bringing up the subject.
Yes.
It seems to me that if we are to value the most critical time in a child's life, which is prior to the age of 6 years old, then we must do something to have people who are dedicated and to pay them for that dedication. And we don't seem to have the fortitude and the integrity to be able to understand that we need to be hiring people who are highly, highly qualified for those first 6 years of life, because that's when the child basically molds all of their vision of the world and their focus of the world.
Yes, and I think the other thing, too, Daria, is that when you consider that in Reggio, 12% of the tax base goes to these preschools and infant toddler centers, and that's a lot of money that's invested in these programs to make them the highest quality that they are, and they're just awesome.
We began to talk about, we only have a few minutes here, but before we go to break, can you tell us a little bit, you've been to Reggio, and I've seen the 100 languages of children.
Yes.
In the Reggio, the quality, we were talking about the depth of time spent on subject matter. It is also reflected in the depth of the kinds of work that the children produce. the artwork, the projects, all are in. When I saw the quality of the products that are produced by these young children under the age of 6, in my mind I was looking at sometimes high school work. I just couldn't believe the quality of the work. Is this something that, some sort of training that the teachers receive in order to be able to get this type of product from the children?
Absolutely. This is a part of their training, but now also consider that a trained art person, the artillerista, is a part of that program and is able to guide many of the perceptions and connections that children make. My mind goes to the little boy. You will remember at the exhibit, the 100 Languages of Children exhibit, sculptures of busts of people. This one little boy, I think he was 5 years old, and he had spent time studying himself in the mirror, seeing his expressions. He had drawn himself many times, but over a period of 3 weeks, he was able to evolve a sculpture of his upper body that looked as if the child were at least 9 years old. Highly sophisticated, highly detailed. And I think this is the thing, that the detail that these children see in what they're engaged in. We may have children at 4 and 5 years old who would draw a tree looking like a popsicle, a lollipop, a stick figure with a round head. A tree. Let's say they're making a tree, and it may look like a lollipop. Well, in this particular situation, the teachers have taken the children outside. They have studied how the roots of the trees go down deep into the dirt, how the limbs evolve from the trunk, how the leaves are attached to those branches, to the limbs to make the branches. And so therefore you see an in-depth study that's done almost in everything that these children are engaged with. And many of the provocations are child initiated, others are teacher initiated. The children who happen to see birds on the window, the teacher would help the birds on the window came back, so then they began to put bread outside for the birds, and then more birds came. They began naming the birds. Then they began drawing the birds, dramatizing the birds, singing about the birds. And so the themes evolve, and maybe a birdhouse evolves. And
well, we're listening right now. We're going to take a short break. We'll be returning to talk about the Reggio Emilia Schools of Italy with Diane Watson from the Richmond School District. You are listening to Children Come First, WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. This is Dr. Dario Burzynski. We are here every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m. We invite you to call us if you have any questions about our program or any of the people on our program at 570-639-2931. That's 570-639-2931. Or you can email us at prokids@rlc.net. That's prokids@rlc.net. And we hope you'll stay with us and join us for our second half hour with Diane Watkins from Richmond, Virginia, the Richmond City Schools, in a few moments. Now listen to our sponsors.
This is going to sound corny, but I just wanted to tell the world about my girlfriend, Lisa. I love sitting there, listening to her talk on the phone with her girlfriends. I mean, she can go on for hours to anybody, about anything. And it's not just about everyday things. It's about deeper stuff, too, like hair and hair products. And little by little, the phone becomes like a permanent part of her head. I get goosebumps just thinking about that. And then there's the way she sort of unhinges her jaws. She scarfs down a quart of double fudge chunk ice cream. She's a keeper. You know, I used to waste my time going inline skating and playing basketball with my buddies. What was I thinking?
Girls, rest assured, you will never in your life meet a guy like this.
I have this fantasy. There we are 50 years from now. She's in a moo-moo, doing her nails, watching soap operas all day. Ooh.
Get some exercise. Get up. Get out. A public service message brought to you by the Ad Council and the President's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports. Jim, I just wanted to tell you the things I love so much about you. Like your pasty white belly and how it fits in those tight shirts that my friends think you shouldn't be wearing. I love how you do that thing where you mash 4 slices of bread into a massive ball of dough and stuff it in your mouth. That's so adorable. And what about when you tell those same jokes from reruns that you've seen over and over again? They make me laugh every single time. Other guys play sports or go running or do something outside, but not you. You're different.
Guys, rest assured you will never in your life meet a girl like this.
P.S. I can't wait until we cuddle in front of pro wrestling all day this Saturday. I hear it's a steel cage Texas death match.
Get some exercise. Get up. Get out. A public service message brought to you by the Ad Council and the President's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports.
Good morning. This is Children Come First with Dr. Dario Burzynski, WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. We are here this morning speaking with Diane Watkins from the Richmond City School. She's Human Resource Coordinator and Staff Development System-wide. And we're talking about the Reggio Emilia daycares of Italy. These are extraordinary schools in Italy that are just incredible. And we're talking about why they are so different and why they are so effective. Now, we were talking a little bit about the depth of what children learn, and I remember, Diane, the video we saw of the Reggio schools. Can you reflect for us that the project that went on in that video?
Of course, the video evolved to show the children who made a visit to the marketplace in the city of Reggio. And in the marketplace, there were 2 statues of lions. Well, over a period of time and going back and forth, the children climbed on the lions and, of course, felt the mane and had fun dramatizing the sounds that a lion would make. There were also pictures of real lions that the teachers had introduced in videos in the classrooms. Then the children went back and they began making clay molds of their feet, of the lion's feet. And they used those, took those back to the classroom and painted those. And then they, in addition, they measured the lion. They traced the shadow of the lion on big paper as the shadow was cast to the ground. And so they had these products that they developed. And then, of course, they made clay lions.
Oh, those were extraordinary.
They did shadow play of lion actions. So the point was that over a long period of time, the children were engaged in many experiences which would give them a deep sense of what a lion is like. And the products were just extremely sophisticated, but yet the children had so much fun with the activity.
Now, the children. There's one major difference, if I'm correct here, in compared to American daycare, and that is in the Reggio schools, the ages of the children are all intermixed, 3 to 6-year-olds in the same class. Is that correct?
Yes, there is some multi-age grouping. Of course, we see some of that here too. But here again, the children there is across the multi-age groupings. Of course, so that the idea then is that younger children will learn from the older children. And this is a philosophy that's being exercised in some of our preschool programs here. So that may not be quite as unique, Daria, as one may think.
Well, for many places, they're grouped by age and do not move from one age to the. I thought the Virginia law said that they had to be in the same age grouping in daycare under the age of 6. I guess I had that incorrect. Now, the curriculum for the Reggio schools is not something that is imposed from the outside. It is something that evolves from interests of children. Is that correct?
That's right. And for example, the example that I gave about the birds, that came because children saw birds and were interested in them, and so the teachers caught that and helped the children to expand that. So that many of the activities that occur are provoked by the children, but then some are introduced by a teacher who will bring something into the environment, like a vase of poppies. And that might elicit a discussion on poppies, and then there may be a trip to the poppy fields. And, of course, poppies are everywhere, are seen quite prevalent in the environment in Reggio. So, and then that will grow to drawing and painting poppies. And so we saw the most elaborate illustrations of that. In fact, there were two little girls when I was there in one of those schools who were there painting poppies, and they had a vase of poppies there at their fingertips as they would look at the poppies and they'd go back and paint. The teachers had matched the paints to to nature, so that they were able to choose a color that was really the color of the poppies in the vases. So they used those colors, and then we saw them counting them. And then we saw a child of the two little children who were working together. One of them took a magnifying glass and went over to the poppy vase and peered inside and went back to her easel and put the tiny little poppy seeds in the center of the flower. So, to us, that was extremely high-level thinking. We probably would not see that so much in many of our schools.
Well, we can't describe over the radio the types of projects and the product that comes from these children, but I was just in awe. The project that comes around, the 100 Languages of Children, just is indescribable in terms of the kind of work that is produced by these very young children in the Reggio schools. Let's talk about the term, the 100 Languages of Children. The children don't speak 100 languages in the Reggio schools.
But, of course, the theory is this, that there are many, many ways in which children express themselves. And it brings me to the poem that Loris Malaguzzi wrote, and it's called No Way, the 100 is There. And I think that if you hear that, could I read just the poem?
Oh, go right ahead and read it.
This is the way it goes. It's called No Way, the 100 is There. It's by Loris Malaguzzi. The child is made of 100. The child has 100 languages, 100 hands, 100 thoughts, 100 ways of thinking, of playing, of speaking. 100, always 100 ways of listening, of marveling, of loving. 100 joys for singing and understanding. 100 worlds to discover. 100 worlds to invent. 100 worlds to dream. The child has 100 languages and 100 more. But they steal 99. The school and the culture separate the head from the body. They tell the child to think without hands, to do without head, to listen and not to speak, to understand without joy, to love and to marvel only at Easter and Christmas. They tell the child to discover the world already there, and of the 100, they steal 99. They tell the child that work and play, reality and fantasy, science and imagination, sky and earth, reason and dream are things that do not belong together. And thus they tell the child that the 100 is not there. And the child says, no way, the 100 is there. So I think that depicts the philosophy of Loris Malaguzzi and the approach that is used in Reggio.
I think that says it perfectly well. That was an incredible poem. Let's take a look now at how teachers measure progress. How do teachers measure progress in the Reggio schools? I know in American schools we have all this paperwork. We write down things in the daycare when the child had their diaper changed, when they get a bottle, when they get fed, what kinds of documentation do they have in the Reggio
Well,
schools?
they're quite elaborate, really, and the teachers spend so much time in keeping records, good records of the children's growth and development. One example is that they will put a tape recorder on a table, and as children are speaking to each other, dialoguing, that will be captured on the tape, and then later the teachers will go back and transcribe the tape. And so they're able to show over time how the children's language developed. And so to me, that's an excellent example of something that we probably wouldn't take time to do. The other thing, of course, is they keep many portfolios. Well, we do some of that. In many of our preschools, we do a lot of that. Portfolios and children's growth, how the children's writing language changed over time.
Pardon me, I sneezed in the middle of the program. I didn't mean to. So the documentation is on many different levels. Besides for the products themselves, the art, the clay, the artwork, the structures that they build, their children also are able to, parents know from one moment to the next, and it sounds like a tremendous amount of work. Are the teachers able to have time to do this documentation?
I'm sure they do, and I cannot tell you what their schedule is like, but there is time for them to do maintain the documentation that they need. In addition to the co-teachers, I think I might have said that some parents come in from time to time to volunteer, so there is some opportunity for teachers to meet and share, and of course they don't mind meeting after school, after hours, and so they do put a lot of time in the documentation. Now the documentation also includes photographs, and you'll see a wall of photographs with captions underneath, so the parent is able to see readily what kinds of activities the children were engaged in, but also it's a good record of what the children are able to do.
Now, the only way we would find out about these schools is to be able to observe the entourage that comes around the 100 languages of children. Are they touring the United States right now?
Yes, it's my understanding that the exhibit that was in Richmond a year ago is now at Mills College. It'll be there for 2 years.
Where's Mills College?
California, Northern California. And there is another exhibit that has been developed that is to be crisscrossing the United States. Of course, there's a third exhibit that's in Europe that crisscrosses Europe. And but the American edition, of course, was the one that we had last year and is now at Mills College. And it's my understanding that an exhibit will be in Atlanta, I believe, in the fall. So it has moved across the country. It has been in major cities across our United States and will continue to be brought, I'm sure. I believe that Dayton will have it back soon, Dayton, Ohio. It's been in Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, through their Family Education Center, brought the exhibit a few years ago. So it's been in that area of Pennsylvania. There may be other areas in Pennsylvania where it has been, I'm not sure. But certainly the exhibit does give to people a deeper understanding of what the programs are like there in Italy.
You are listening to Children Come First with Dr. Dario Burzynski, WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. We are here every Tuesday from 10 to 11 AM. Today we are speaking with Diane Watkins, She is the Human Resources Trainer for the Richmond City Schools. She has been involved in early childhood education for many years, and she is our expert today on the Reggio Emilia Schools of Italy. They are daycares all over Italy. They are the most extraordinary schools, daycares in the world, and they travel around with demonstrations of the children's product and videos in what they call the 100 languages of children, the Reggio Emilia approach to early childhood education. And the children from these daycare institutions in Italy are just the most extraordinary in terms of depth, understanding, critical thinking skills, and the ability to understand huge amounts of information in a variety of different ways. And it is all because of the philosophical premise of Loris Malaguzzi, who began educating the mothers single mothers after World War II, who created this community of schools that is just extraordinary in the country of Italy. And Diane, we're moving towards our last 15 minutes here on our program. Is there anything you'd like to convey to our public that we haven't really talked about?
Well, I just wanted to clarify that the Reggio Emilia schools are found in Reggio Emilia, Italy, and people from all over the world go there or are learning from them more about this particular approach to early childhood education. And I think, the thing that I want to stress is this issue of quality. I think that so often, I think we touched on it earlier, that we don't put as many resources as we could into those early years. And certainly all the research is showing that we have to provide a rich foundation in order for children to be successful later. So basically, Dario, I think that is one of the most important messages I'd like to leave.
Well, some of the areas that the Reggio schools, they follow many principles. And some of the principles are that children learn by interacting with their environment and actively transform their relationships with the world of adults, things, and events in original ways with their peers. They participate in constructing their identity and the identity of others. They also interact among children. Their interactions among children is their fundamental experience for the first years of their life. Their interaction is positive with both adults and with other children. Talk to us about how children in the Reggio schools are disciplined.
Excuse me?
Talk to us.
Are they disciplined?
Yes.
Well, in many ways, such as we would do, certainly, I think it should be said that the children are just average kids. I mean, they're not rich kids. They're not brilliant kids. They're just average children, and so that certainly they engage in active play and do the kinds of actions that average kids do. I observed some children who were misbehaving, and the teacher isolated one, and then later on the child was able to go back and interact. So that here again, the timeout, we saw examples of timeout, which we see here too. So, but we didn't see anything more rigid than that.
Isn't it true that a lot of the projects and the interactions of children, they allow children the opportunity to fail and frustration in order to be able to learn those kinds, how to overcome those events in life rather than giving them all the answers?
Yes, I definitely feel that we saw examples of that. So that the idea that children are given so many opportunities for expression, and that they find ways in which they are able to express themselves best. And so definitely there is opportunity for trial and error, and but no one feels that that's a negative. That's a plus. And so that we learn, that they learn early, that they learn through mistakes. And certainly the adults around, their parents and teachers also would embrace that as the way they operate themselves. There's a great deal of close collaboration among the adults, and I think that Sergio Spaghieri, who was in Italy and sent this message, he was saying that I can give you one thing, and you can give me one thing. We could trade, and we'd each have one thing. But I give you an idea, you give me an idea, and then I have two ideas, and ideas multiply, and I can share those ideas. And so I think that this is what we saw, that the collaboration and the sharing and embracing of professionalism, of attitude, was certainly a plus.
We don't give as many opportunities to our educators in this country as they do in other countries for teachers to work together, to do teamwork, and to do collaborative work. I know you're unique, Diane, and you're going to tell me no because you do that in the Richmond schools, but for the most part in America, we don't give teachers the opportunities to collaborate and interact. And so they are not examples to the children of interaction and working together as models. And that's something that we really need to look at in the Reggio schools, exemplify how the director, the teachers, and the parents, and the students all become co-workers in the process very effectively. And I personally believe this interaction minimizes the negative results among children in terms of their adjustment, their learning processes, their communication, their self-learning. And I believe that it really minimizes a lot of the conflict and could minimize many conflicts because there's communication going on all the time among all the factors.
That's right.
And all the parties that are involved.
Certainly the adults model that. There was another point I wanted to make, and that was that the parents will bring their children to those preschool centers. If the child is having adjustment problems, the parent will stay until the child feels comfortable in the environment. And of course, many times we see here not that opportunity. The parent leaves the child cries and cries, and so forth. But in these schools, the parent just stays until the child feels comfortable, and so I thought that was something else that your listeners might want to know about.
Now, the businesses in Italy, do they accommodate mothers who don't show up for work on time because they're sitting waiting for their child to calm down?
Well, I'm sure that it would be difficult to give a blanket, answer to that, but there is within the community an embracing of early childhood principles. And I think this is what makes this particular community so unique, because of the understanding of the importance of these programs. Well, and so I guess that would be true, Daria, in some situations, so where the employer might allow that employee to spend some more time. I can't say that would be the rule, though.
Well, David Elkind, many years ago, I guess it was in the late 1980s, wrote a book called The Hurried Child, and it had a dramatic effect on me. I met David, and how just that one special philosophical focus of hurrying our children, but rather taking the time to allow them to adjust to situations in a non-stressful way, developmentally assist them dramatically, especially in their emotional and attachment development. And the fact that we do this in such a dramatic way, drop them off and allow them to cry, and within this environment that we separate them from the mother, actually builds many kinds of psychological misfunctions for children. And I think the Reggio schools really demonstrate how this very relaxed way of having children move from one area of their life to the next, one event to the next, puts them in a more flow of life and a more at their own pace, which is something that we adults spend billions of dollars trying to recapture.
Certainly.
With our multi-market in terms of self-help books.
Another interesting thing that I saw, of course, is that each center has its own cook or cooks, and they prepare elaborate meals for the children.
Ah, it's Italy.
Yes, elaborate food for the children. And, of course, the children are seated at beautiful tablecloth tables with real utensils. And so there's a hominess about that. And then, of course, there's the exposure to all kinds of foods. And there may be photographs of the food for the day, and the children get to see what the menu is. So I thought that was very interesting.
Are the children forced to learn reading and math?
That evolves, and that's based upon the children's interest. We saw children writing words, but we didn't get the impression that there was a structured time when that occurred. Certainly, I guess if a child is interested in reading or writing, a teacher will work with that child. So, but it's not strongly what you would say academic. It's enriched with in-depth concept development. But we didn't see a great deal of structure. We did lots of books and opportunities for children to read, reading centers, little reading corners and nooks. But as far as a structured program, we didn't get that impression.
So they don't adhere to developmentally appropriate practices that we would consider in the United States?
Well, I can't say that either. I think that the very fact that we saw children who were about 4 and 5 years old, who were beginning to write words, would lend us to believe that they get some of that. Some of it comes from the children's own interest in wanting to do it. And I think that is a part of what we saw. And but when you see the in-depth drawings, then you certainly know that the children are internalizing so much. We did find that even though there were no studies to show us, the teachers did say that the children did very well once they went into the traditional classrooms at age 6 years old.
Oh, that was my next question.
So they do very well and are able to, if there are any gaps, are able to overcome them. But the children go so prepared that they do so well once they get to normal or regular classroom situations. And of course now there's a movement to try to push up some of the principles into those traditional classrooms, because the classrooms are at those elementary grades are very traditional.
You have been listening to Children Come First with Dr. Dario Burzynski. We have been talking today. We are here every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m. And today we are talking with Diane Watkins from the Richmond City Schools. She is Human Resource Coordinator, and what we have been talking about are the Reggio Emilia daycares of Italy. If you'd like more information on these programs, or any other information on any of the other programs we have had, or would like to suggest guests on our program, you may call us at 570-639-2931. That's 570-639-2931. Diane, do you have anything else you'd like to talk about in the last 30 seconds of our program?
Yes. Your listeners may want to check with Merrill Palmer Institute at Wayne State University for more information from their work in Reggio. As I said before, Carnegie Mellon. The schools of St. Louis, there are about 3 or 4 adaptations of Reggio in the city of St. Louis. At VPI, Virginia Polytechnic Institute, there's an adaptation in their family child care center. And then there are other adaptations across the country, I'm sure.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And if anyone else would like information on the Reggio Schools of Italy daycares, you may call us at 570-639-2931. That's 570-639-2931. Or email us at prokids, PROKIDS, at rlc.net. That's prokids at rlc.net. We thank you for joining us today, and we enjoy having you. Please come and join us again next week from 10 to 11 a.m. on Children Come First with Dr. Dario Burzynski as we talk about issues relating to children everywhere. Thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful day and week.